Hello again. Good afternoon. I'm still the same person. And he's still the same person. But you may not have been in our session. How many people were in Adrian's? Okay, so not everybody. And how many in mine? So some people. Okay, so what we're going to try and do, can I apologise? Start with an apology. We had this nicely worked out, what we were going to do this afternoon as a training session to practice some of the techniques that we've used. And we had it nicely worked out based on what, 25 people?
20 to 25.
20 to 25 people we thought would be about what we would have. And we've just made it that we've got 40. So it's going to be very comfortable here. But we might use the outside a bit as well. And those people by the door, it's either, do you want to come in or do you want to just go? Okay, it doesn't matter, come in anyway. What we're going to do, we want to try and I'm going to do the bit up till break. Adrian's going to do from break till the end. And we're going to try and give you the opportunity to practice some of the techniques that we've used for many years. And I'm sure that a lot of you will have used them as well. So we're going to give you some stuff to do. And it will work, I'm sure. I'm sure. If it doesn't, then it's his fault. Okay? And if it does work, it's okay. Right. Okay. A couple of things. I did do this in the session as well, but wherever I go, whenever I run training courses, whenever I go to conferences, whenever I do my job, I almost always have to explain what a business analyst is, and it shouldn't be necessary here, should it? Because hopefully we all know. But I'm going to use the slide that I used in my session just to start with, just to remind you that a business analyst can never be involved too early. And I suspect they can never be involved too late. And I don't mean leave it until late. I mean they have to be involved from the first time, actually even before there's an idea. Right? Because I think they can help organisations find ideas. And I think they probably do need to be around at the end to see if the ideas were successful and benefits were achieved. I must admit, to be honest, I don't know many business analysts who will, in their job, do the whole journey. So I suspect that many of you, if I was to just, perhaps because I want to, this afternoon is nice and we've got plenty of time to do things interactively. That's the picture I used before. We've got kind of 5 things on it. Can I just ask you, this will be useful for both of us, how many of you in your job get involved with helping your businesses or your customers to develop their strategy? Okay, so it's not your own company, I hope, definitely, right? So that's some of you. How many of you then, even if you don't do that, how many of you get involved with your customers or your own business in terms of identifying problems and trying to figure out what the situation is? Probably getting a few more people there. Okay, great. How many of you do some sort of, having got to that, some sort of analysis of the various stakeholders? Some others, right? And then, remember, we haven't even got a project yet. So, and I think, I'm very, very biased on this. I believe that we start too many projects. Right? We don't spend long enough deciding which ones we should do, and we're not brave enough to cancel them later because it makes us look really silly that we started. Right? So what I think here is we need to develop the concept of a project that will help us solve some problems. And I hope that means that we don't start a project unless we know it's going to solve some problems, or at least do something useful. So how many of you get involved with scoping out projects? Okay, and that's an input to this business case. Can I have the money, please? Right? And actually that, I don't know about you, but in our country at the moment, if you want to run a workshop, you need a business case. If you want some donuts in the workshop, you need a business case. Not quite that bad, but almost everything has to be justified in terms of the financial value. So how many of you get involved with business cases? Right, that's quite a low number, isn't it? Interesting. So particularly those people who got involved all the way up here. So you just get the money, do you? Is it just appears? Okay. Then let's go into this bit. How many of you get involved with, once somebody has started a project, get involved with defining, managing, documenting requirements and modelling? Yeah. Good. Well, I hope they're the right requirements for the right project, for the right thing, that are consistent with strategy, don't you? Because otherwise, what a waste of time. Right? Anybody get involved after that? This is the good thing about being a business analyst. Sometimes you do that and then give it to somebody else. How many get involved with solution development as well? Okay. Did anyone put their hand up for all of that? There you go. Good luck. Right. Okay, but have we got everybody? Did anyone not put their hand up at all? Yeah, it's just, I would wonder what you did. I would be concerned. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're only going to do that bit this afternoon. Right? We're not going to touch detailed requirements. We're not going to touch anything to do with solution development. We're going to a little bit say at least what we're going to do is the right thing. So we're going to not really talk about business case, but input to it, which gives us 4 subject areas to do. The way we're going to do those, I'm going to do the first 2, strategic analysis and problem situation analysis, and then Adrian's going to do stakeholder analysis and developing a project concept. Right? And that will take us anything between 5 minutes and 3 hours. Right? And I've no idea how long it's going to take because we don't want to do the talking. Right? We want you to do the work. So if you don't want to do the work, good luck. Right? But seriously, I think the only way to learn techniques is to practice them, right? And to try them out. So I'm going to just go through some of the techniques that we use and then let you in your groups, and we'll work out a way, we have sort of worked out a way to get you to work in groups. We had originally planned that each group presented back to the other groups, but I'm not sure we're going to be able to do that with 40 people in the room. So we'll have a go. Is that all right? Does that make sense to everybody about what we're going to try and do? If there's any questions, please just ask as we go along, right? So that we don't need to wait till the end, just any questions. Particularly if I'm doing an example and you think, I wouldn't be able to do one of those, because as soon as I finish talking, you're going to be doing one of those. Okay, so, right with that? So, I'm going to start with strategic analysis, whatever that might mean. And I don't want to sort of get too many questions from each person in the audience, but I think we probably understand that strategic analysis is understanding quite big things over quite a long distance in terms of time sometimes. Although I must admit strategies seem to be getting shorter and shorter as things change all the time. Those of you who were around for the talk that I did earlier will know that I talked a lot about scope, a lot about how big an area we're studying. Right? And I think a very important point, we'll emphasise this a lot today, everything we're going to show you and everything you're going to practice will work at any level. Right? So we might pick a particular level to practice it, but you can work at a much lower level, you can work at a much higher level, that's really up to you. I've definitely used all the techniques I'm going to show you, I've used on my company, and I've used on my customers' companies, and sometimes I've used them at departmental level, and sometimes I've used them at a kind of group level. So we could pick almost any to do it for. And so I want to start with something that seems really silly. Anyone know what that is? It's a circle, isn't it? Yeah. But I'm not that bad at drawing circles, but I did it once and somebody says an egg. And I thought, I've done something wrong somewhere. Okay, it is a circle, but it's not just a circle. Right? It's very important for what we're going to do. I've got it on the slide in a minute as well. For the whole purpose of what we're going to do this afternoon, that is our world. Okay? So if that is the world, the planet Earth, then there's a bit of scoping there, isn't there? Everything inside there is on our planet, and everything, well, it goes on a bit, doesn't it? It's just, the flip chart's not really big enough, is it? Right? And that is because during my section this afternoon, I'm going to talk to start with about techniques that understand the outside of our world, and other techniques that help us understand what's inside our world. And because they're separate techniques, it's important to know where that line is. So if that line is a product that you sell, or a department within your organisation, if it's a department within your organisation, then everything inside, everything to do with your department is internal, but the rest of your organisation is in the outside bit. Right? If that's the whole of your company, then we're talking out here of your competitors and the world in which we work. Right? I just want to clarify one more thing before we get going. How many of us work in the world? I'm hoping this is when everybody says yes. I really do hope. You know, we had a couple of Martians once, but you know, they didn't stay on the whole course, did they? Really, they disappeared off. No, seriously, we all have that. But how big is our working world? It's probably a bigger question, isn't it? Right. So there it is. Right. So we've got the world in which we work. That is in the outside world, and that's even got an edge because we can't keep going, can we? Let's for instance, the thing I talked about this morning. If you keep going forever, you never get anything done because you say this affects this, affects this, affects this, affects this. You have to know what the scope is and what's relevant to you. So what we're going to look in the techniques is we're going to start by looking what things are happening in the outside world that affect us. And some of those will affect us because of the job we do. Some will affect us because the type of organisation we work for. It might be a small organisation, it might be a large organisation. We might be affected because we work in the software industry. We'd be affected by different things than if we were in the airline industry. Right? So we need to know things, I guess, that are to do with the business domain in which we work. Right? Now I'm going to try something with you. Apologies if I'm sort of asking general questions, but when we watch the news and we see something happening, no matter what it is, something, let's make a reasonably big event happens, what is our immediate thoughts? How does it affect me? Yeah, exactly, that's what I was thinking. And then after a few seconds of thinking that's a bit selfish, right, what do we think? Yeah, well, how far others? How far do we go next?
Our relatives.
Our relatives, I think. You know, I'm not saying this is a fact, but it's probably true, isn't it? And then we can maybe think a little bit further. Anyone else before we talk?
Parents.
Parents, okay, maybe the dog, my granny, but it's interesting that you said that because that's actually true for everybody, isn't it? It was very interesting that none of you said my company. True? But I think eventually you probably do, right? So if somebody said the software industry is going to go, it's going to be taxed at 100% on profit, I think you'd start thinking about it if you worked in the software industry, wouldn't you? Right? And almost you will immediately think of it from the point of view of the business domain in which you work. Right? So it might be a banking environment, it might be a transport environment, right? But even then, you're not affected in the same way. Right? So if airline prices go up, is that a good thing or a bad thing for airlines? All of them? No, because some of them are low-cost airlines, and some of them are saying, well, that's good because people pay whatever. Right? So there is, even within that, your organisation, which might be have a particularly small market or a particular product, right, that is affected in a different way from other people. Does that make sense? Right? So I've got my three layers, and what we're going to do is we're going to treat that middle one as the world. Right? So anything inside there we're going to treat as internal, and what we're looking for is things that are happening that are going to affect us. And I'm going to be careful with the word affect because I'm not yet going to say whether they affect us in a good way or a bad way. Right? Because immediately we'll think, I don't know, some of you will think in a good way and some will think in a bad way. Right? So we'll talk about that later as well. Just for completeness, before I do this particular one in a bit more detail, in the job I do, and probably most of you, it's not that likely, unless you run your own business, that you're going to be thinking about the whole organisation. You're probably thinking about the department or the product area or the bit you're currently working on. Right? So I suspect that if I was working on some work for something like an airline, I wouldn't be looking at the whole of the airline. I might be looking at maybe the catering part of it, or the flight bit, or the ticketing, something like that. Okay? So, if we are at the department or functional product level, then the really nasty thing is the rest of our organisation are external. They do stuff that we have to react to, and we probably can't control it. Right? So, what we're really looking at here is influences. Right? These are things that are outside, they're going to happen, they're outside our control, we need to respond to them. Whereas these things, I think we've got some control. We can say, well, don't do that then, because they are internal to us. Is everybody okay with that distinction between those two? Okay? And so it just depends on where you draw the boundary, really. Of course, the outside world is still there. So when we do the little exercise in a minute, I'll be looking at, you'll be trying to find some things that are happening in the outside world that might affect you, some things that are kind of unique to your organisation or your domain, and then internally looking at the departments and things like that. Okay, is that all right? Okay, so let's have a look at some of these. And you may have seen some of them before, so let me look at two external techniques. An English word called pestle. You don't need to know what the word means, you need to know what the letters are. And it's only a very quick way, and I'll tell you what they all mean in a minute. It's a very, very quick way of understanding the sorts of things that are going on outside your organisation that may affect you, possibly negatively, possibly positively. But why we do it, and the other things I'm going to show you, is that so we don't just think of one thing and do something about it. Then something else happens and we do something about it. And then something else happens. We try and look at everything that's going on and try and react to the complete thing. Now some of these will cause us problems. I was at a company the other day and I looked at all 6 of them, and all 6 of them were causing problems for them at the moment. That meant that company was in a real mess, didn't it? Right? Everything that seemed to be going wrong at the same time. We sometimes call it a perfect storm. Right? Absolutely everything that could go wrong is going wrong. And it's very difficult to find a way out of that one. Okay, so that's that. That's the sort of overall idea. I don't know, if obviously, when I do this in France, we call it le peste. No, that makes any sense. Le peste rather than peste. Right? Okay, so what do the letters stand for? And let's do a quick example. What Adrian and I are going to do this afternoon, we're going to pick a very, very simple business area that I'm pretty sure we'll all be comfortable with, and we're going to do an example for that business area. Then we're going to give you some business areas to have a go at yourselves and practice, and we'll try and walk around and see what you're doing, which might be tricky, but occasionally I think maybe groups might want to just go out there and come back in, or tell you when we're going to be back. Right? So we're going to do that, and I think the one we're going to use a cafe. Right? Just a cafe in the high street anywhere, because that pretty much works anywhere in the world. And we're going to have a look at a particular cafe and identify what's going on that might affect them. Initially externally, the way we'll do it is I'll do this and I'll do a second technique, then you'll practice it, then we'll come and do maybe a couple of techniques internally and you practice it, and then we'll move, see what happens from there on. Okay, so PESTLE stands for these things. So in the middle is that first thing, the company, the organisation, whichever you want it might be. And the sequence of these letters doesn't really matter. It also doesn't really matter if you have something under each heading, but what we'll expect you to do is to maybe list your ideas under the letter P, list your ideas under the letter E, etc. So for instance, if I was doing the cafe type one, and you don't have to have something for all of them, it might not be relevant, but the interesting thing about this is it will be different for different companies, and it will be different in different parts of the world, and it will be different in all sorts of things. Now I'm not going to, I think it's obvious that I would like you to do this for a cafe here in Belarus, that makes sense, right? Because you know the answers to that better than I do. But for instance, if we were doing this under political, we might find things under there like the rules for the local government, right? That they've said about maybe the rules for expanding the cafe. Those sorts of things. But we might also put in there things that say something that is actually happening in the UK at the moment. There's a very big thing at the moment, charging more tax to food you buy and eat in the cafe rather than food you buy and take away. Right? And obviously, you know, a lot of people now are letting you eat inside by giving you in a bag, right? So that they can pretend you were taking it away, so they don't have to pay the tax. Sure, that could happen anywhere. Right? So you've got that under political. Just as this is the first letter I'm explaining, be a little bit careful. Don't just do the really big things that affect everybody, right? but try to think of something that is specific, if you can, to the area that you're dealing with. Right? So we're talking about a cafe, we need to know a little bit about it, we need to analyse it, and we probably need to see, is it a large cafe or a small cafe? Is it, we've decided today to do a little standalone cafe, haven't we? The manager runs it, it's not McDonald's, it's not a chain around the world, it is just these people who are running it. I'm going to say this bit quite a lot. When we're doing this, don't think about what you're going to do about it. All we're doing is listing the things we need to think about. We'll come back later and look about what we're going to do about it. Right? Because otherwise you get an immediate reaction, don't you? I said there was something about, what did I say, local policy. So we do something about that before we've investigated the rest of it. So, I think there's probably some stuff going on about economics around, isn't there, at the moment? So there might be things in there that are quite big things, like the impact of the euro, or the impact of deflation, or whatever. Right? There might be in there, but there'll be some things that are specific to cafes, which would be things like, have people got spare money to go and drink in a cafe, or are they more likely to go somewhere else? Yeah, is that okay with everybody? So don't expect to get maybe just one thing under here. There's just a few things I might get in there. And if you were doing this for real, you wouldn't just do it once. You'd keep it and keep updating it as you went along. So something would happen, and once you finish thinking, how does it affect me? How does it affect my family? You come back here and think, oh, I wonder how it affects the vessel for my company. Right? Now, as a business analyst who might be working for producing something for another company, it's a very good idea to do this for them. So you can do it for your customers as well as for you, because you'll be able to find out what's worrying them. Right? So if your customer has economic problems, it might not be a good time to put your price up. That makes sense? Or you might say, well, pay some now, pay some later. I've started doing it. I've already started doing what I said you shouldn't do, which is thinking about solutions. So there you go. Right? It's so easily done. Okay, under here, we've used the word social. The full term for this is socio-cultural. Right? There are cultural differences, obviously, in countries, but there are cultural and social differences in companies. And even if we looked at 4 or 5 cafes, they probably would have a different way of working. Right? But also, we could look at social trends to whether people do drink more in cafes or drink more in bars or eat or whatever else. So we'd have the economy in there. So we've got trend, in my case down here, because I've done this for us really a few times, trends away from pubs and bars. Certainly in London there is much more of a trend towards coffee houses, and it's interesting because when I was growing up in London many years ago, coffee bars were very, very popular, then they kind of disappeared for a while, and they've sort of come back round again. Mostly with the same name everywhere you go in the world, but let's not worry about Starbucks just yet. Oh, sorry. Right, okay. Anyone watch The Simpsons? Anyone seen The Simpsons? Yeah. Just for those who see The Simpsons, there's a lovely scene in The Simpsons where he goes into a shopping mall, a bit like the one we went to. It's got about 4 floors in the shopping mall, and every shop, there's no shops, everything is a Starbucks cafe. There is nothing else except Starbucks cafes, except one shop, which has a big sign on it that says Starbucks coming soon. Anyway, this little cafe we're talking about is just a little cafe in the high street, and there's lots of other things going on. Right? Okay, good. So far, so good. Okay, T, pretty big one in our game, isn't it? How might technology affect somebody running a cafe? Right? Now, the obvious ones in there are things like having Wi-Fi for our customers, aren't they? But they could also be, what's certainly affecting us is people paying, not by credit card, but by paying by mobile phone or some sort of electronic transfer. Things like that might come under technology. We're not saying they're good or bad, we're just saying they're happening and we need to think about them. Legal, well, legal is probably pretty much what it says. There may be health and safety issues, there may be employment law, there may be things about, if it was a bar, there would be rules about age, etc. If it's a cafe, there may be things about opening hours and restrictions on employment. Might be stuff about advertising, right? So it might be that we have a really good idea, but we're not allowed to advertise it because it may not be provable. Okay, environmental. This might be things like, again, if we're thinking cafe, people will be looking at whether there is a trend towards people. I will tell a story, a very quick one. I personally, I don't know if it matters that I personally, I don't go to Starbucks anymore. Right? Personally. It's weird. Right? And the reason is because I found out 2 years ago that they tried to trademark Ethiopian coffee so that they could charge the Ethiopians 50% more, right? And the Ethiopians didn't even own their own coffee, right? So I thought, well, that doesn't seem very good. So I stopped going to Starbucks, as did a lot of other people. And immediately, interesting enough, Starbucks stopped and sold the rights back to the... So there was a lot of pressure from the customers saying, we don't think that is, it wasn't so much environment, but it does come under the environmentally friendly type stuff. And so people will say, this coffee is free trade or whatever. Right? Does that make sense? Is the coffee one? Right, as a cafe. What else have we got in there? Oh, don't know if it's relevant or not relevant, but the other things comes under environmental, but maybe also a bit socio-cultural. Maybe things like people who might be, for whatever reason, deciding to drink low-fat milk, something like that. So people may be conscious of the sorts of foods that they eat. Things like that might come into it. And the other one that I always think is possible to consider under environment is space. Right? Is how much room do we have, and do people want to come into a cafe where there's lots of space, or do they want to go where it's really busy? And it might well be that we can't cope if there's too many people busy. You okay with all that? So that's PESTLE, and all PESTLE does, it doesn't matter whether it's those words and it doesn't matter whether it's those letters, it just says, instead of just thinking about the outside world, give it some structure. Right? Use these letters to spark off some ideas. And it won't matter if you're not sure whether it goes under one heading or another one. That really doesn't matter. We just want a long list of things to think about. And it used to be called PEST, because the L was always part of political, and the E was always part of social. Right? But then people found themselves splitting them out, so the word became bigger. So when you're doing political, you might think of legal anyway. When you're doing social, you might think of environmental. That doesn't matter. Is everybody all right with that? Right? Right. Good. Great. Right, so that's one. I'm going to do one more, and then we're going to give you an opportunity to have a go at it. I quite like PESTLE, but it's not my favourite of the external techniques. My favourite personal one for business is something called Porter's 5 Forces. And this is about seeing the organisation as a business, but it does work for government departments and it does work for other sorts of organisations. But it's basically saying, we'd like to do certain things, but we're being pressurised by things that are going on outside that force us to do things differently. Right? And it really is quite an important one. And this is Porter's 5 Forces. It's been around a long time, so many of you may have seen it. In the centre is something that obviously all businesses think about all the time, and that is what are their competitors doing. Right? Because imagine your competitors saying, I've just done a PESTLE as well. Right? So everybody's got exactly the same stuff. So you say, well, I'll put my prices up, and they say, well, I'll put my prices up. You get in a problem. So in the middle, there is rivalry amongst existing firms. Now that may be people doing the same thing as you in different countries, it may be people doing the same thing as you in the same country, but if your customer is buying from different places, be careful. But also be very careful with if I do the cafe, you'd think that the quick answer would be, what other cafes are there in the area? That is the competitor. But actually, it might also be restaurants, bars, takeaways, the local shop, the garage selling drinks, those sorts of things. So your competitors are really, in the modern world, in the world in which I live all the time, everybody's your competitor because everybody's got a limited amount of money, and they can't buy everything they want, so they've got to make a choice. I'll give you an airline one just as an example. Let me see if you can work this out. Whenever I fly internally in the UK, from London to Edinburgh, I do a lot. I always fly on British Airways. Okay? So, but British Airways have lots of other competitors. Right? So why do I fly British Airways? Anyone want to try and guess?
Miles and
Sorry?
Alias member.
That's a good one, yeah. I am, but no. That's not the main reason, but it's a very good reason.
You like the service?
I like the service, I do, but that's not the reason.
Your patriot.
Support your favorite national company.
Nice.
That's a very good one, but it's not my reason.
You had no reason.
You
I have no reason. I do have a reason. I do have a reason. That's a good answer. That's a good answer. That's a good answer. And it's not the price even. The price is close. I mean, if it was much more expensive, I wouldn't. So it's not just price.
You have this.
Trademark, you like this
Trademark.
trademark?
This is good stuff, isn't it? Now, if you don't know, that's not a problem.
You
Tell you what,
do it.
if you don't know, it's not a problem. If British Airways don't know, it's a real problem, isn't it? Because they might do the wrong things. Right? I'll give you the two reasons, and actually one of them is one that we shouldn't really share, should we? But they do give me a free drink. So I can be bought. But that's not the main reason. The main reason is British Airways is the only carrier in the UK that allows you to take a bag on the plane and a laptop. Okay? Not, as some of the airlines, you must take your laptop and put it in the bag. Right? Now, you're all nodding now, because actually that's quite useful to me, because I'm flying to Edinburgh, and if I don't have to put a bag in the hold, that saves me a lot of time. Right? And I always travel with a laptop, and it's either take a laptop or a shirt. So, so does that make sense? Now, is that important to British Airways? Probably is, isn't it? Because that is a differentiator. It's not costing them very much. So, okay, so that's an example of what they've looked at and why people don't fly on other airlines. And they've done something pretty simple. And they've got me. Okay, so they just got me. But I expect they've got other people as well. All the other things you said, by the way, might be reasons why other people fly. And therefore you should be thinking about those as well. Right? Okay? Right, good. But it's important that they get it right because I have a choice. So this arrow, this force, this influence, is how much power do our buyers have to go somewhere else and buy? Right? If they don't like my cafe, do they go somewhere else? Does that make sense? Right? And sometimes they have a lot of choice, and sometimes they don't have much choice. Right? All of us, however, are dependent on suppliers, people who supply us with anything we need to do our business. Now that could be software, but it could also be people who supply us with everything else we need to do our business. And very often, the suppliers are not just supplying to us, they're supplying to our competitors as well. And therefore their bargaining power may be quite strong. So we may have to do something then to make it easier for our suppliers to work with us and harder for them to work with somebody else. That might be, and I know I'm slipping into a solution again, but it might be as simple as saying, if you supply to us, you must not supply to them. And that's good on two counts, isn't it? One, we're getting it, and two, they're not. Right? So some stores will tie up the local produce, and so nobody else can buy it. Right? Okay so far? The last two don't happen as often, but they are very important to consider. So we're doing quite nicely here. Our business is running really well. Suddenly, another 10 cafes open. Because it was such a successful business, everybody else has said, well, I'll open a cafe then as well. Right? So this is not about how powerful our buyers are, or how powerful our suppliers are. This is about how likely it is for somebody else to come into the market and make things more complicated for us. Right? And we've seen that, I guess. I know we've talked a lot today with people. I've had a lot of conversations about offshoring and outsourcing and stuff like that. And it's, as soon as another group of people come along and say, hey, I'll do it cheaper, or hey, I'll do it better, and then suddenly there's somebody else in the market, isn't there? And so that is a threat, potentially, and we need to know how big that threat is. The last one is really a killer sometimes in terms of the 5 forces. This isn't a threat of our buyers going somewhere else to buy the same thing. This isn't a threat of the supply disappearing, and it's not even a threat of new people coming into our game. It is a threat of somebody else coming up with a new product or service that means that ours is no longer necessary. Okay? So I'm not sure I have a cafe example for that one, but I have an airline example for it if anyone watches Star Trek. One day when they invent beaming me somewhere else, I will stop using planes. Does that make sense? Right? So the sort of thing that's gone in there, threats of new substitute products and services, are the sorts of things that hit publishers with e-books appearing. Right? They're the sort of things that hit libraries. Right? All of those things, and the big one that happened, I suppose, is Kodak a brand you're aware of? Kodak, the film, maybe not, but it was the third largest company in the world about 25 years ago. 90% of the films in cameras were produced by Kodak. Well, they went bust last year, right? Because they didn't move into the digital market quickly enough. Right? Their brand kept them going for a while. Right? Now that's a big story. There could be little stories, couldn't there, about your company that says we didn't see that coming. Right? So we need to be aware of it. Okay, so there's quite a few things there. We've got 6 things in PESTLE and we've got 5 forces. So we've done a cafe a little bit as we've been going along. Right? We've got 2 more we're going to do, won't we? So we end up with, no, we're going to do 4, aren't we? We're going to do 4. Do we reckon there's probably about 40 people here, isn't there? Yeah? So,
It's probably nearer 50.
is there nearer 50? Okay, well, we'll see how that works. What were our backup ones? We had, I don't want to do airline now, do I? Come up with yesterday. Circus, that's it. I'm going to do. Right, I haven't got it on there, which I should have. We're going to split into groups of about 5 people, and each group, for about 20 minutes or so, I would have thought, is going to go away, 15-20 minutes, just go away, and under the headings of PESTLE and 5 forces, take a piece of paper, take a pen, and just write down something under the headings of PESTL, and maybe have a think about the 5 forces. We could split it and get one group to do PESTLE and the other 5 forces, but I think that's going to be chaos. So, okay, I don't know how we're going to do it group-wise, but if you can sort of take a group of 5, so how about we start from the front? So that's a group of 3, you need to pick 2 people out of there. You're a group of 4, you need to pick 1 person out of there. And I'll let you, you're all business analysts, you'll have this organised in no time, won't you? Any project managers in the room? Okay, can you organise this, please? Otherwise, we're not going to get anywhere. Right. Okay, so try and get yourselves into groups of 5.
Какая у нас бизнес-идея? Какая у нас бизнес-идея?
Сейчас нам подадут. Мы вроде
I meant to be halfway through my bit now. No, that's the bit. I should have said this before you started. Each group, yes, that would. See, next time I do this, it'll be much better. I want down this side. You've probably got 4 groups here and 4 groups there. The first group here, I want to do taxi. The second group, cinema. The third group, petrol. The 4th group, library. And if there's a 5th group, circus. So, taxi, cinema, petrol station, library, circus. And if that's all score, We're just trying to get everybody back if we can.
Сейчас понадо, чуть не устоять, как сказать, спрашивать.
Вообще, на самом деле, это можно целый иконостас, если хочешь покурить. В каждой графе целый иконостас пишет.
Внимание, вопрос. На какой точке остановиться?
Вопрос гранулярности. Главный вопрос действия – это гранулярность.
Первый, по-моему, критерий гранулярности – это то, насколько тот, кто будет читать документ, воспримет его. Потом, в следующем этапе можно увидеть все, следующий увидеть. Документ же не самоцель. Цель – донести информацию до конкретного человека. Они там что-то красиво.
Напишите в социалке, в Facebook промоут. Или в технологии, или в социалке.
Yes, I think so.
Куда писать? Давай мы наоборот написать.
Okay, so just get back in as quickly as we can and we'll do the next bit. So please start. Okay, we're going to start again, I think. Okay, so we had a very detailed plan of how to do this, which I think we've thrown away. So we decided not to review all this because that would obviously take quite a long time. But I would hope that each group will keep their pieces of paper and either go and get a job in a circus or perhaps share it amongst yourselves when we're finished, perhaps. But we are going to build on this, we're going to use these things. So I'm going to do a little bit more now up until coffee to show you some of the things we do with this. So as we go into the next bit, I think you obviously in your groups you need to think how that might affect things like taxi companies, cinemas, etc. I'll stick with the cafe. Hopefully you found it useful. Yeah. As analysts, it's sometimes useful to have a set of standard questions to ask, even before you start. And I think the thing about these external techniques, we're going to look at internal in a minute, the thing about external techniques is when you start working for a new customer, then you can do some work before you start talking to them, can't you? You can start asking them, you know, you begin to know what their, I guess we're heading towards what their problems might be. So, okay, so I'll just wait for everybody to sort of get back and we'll carry on. While we're waiting, just one very quick thing. The time it took you to do that, am I right in saying that none of you have worked in a cinema or a library or a taxi company or a circus or a petrol station? Is that right? Has anyone? No. So in 20 minutes you got a very big discussion going about those things, didn't you? If you ran that in a workshop with some people who were the managers and the people within that business, then you can very quickly get an understanding of what's going on. And actually, this is how we run it. We run it as a kick-off workshop. We go in and we don't necessarily talk about PESEL and 5 courses. We tend to just ask people what sort of things are going on politically and stuff like that. Okay, so let's move into the next bit. The only bad news, I told you that our planning went to pieces. We did have loads of pens. Obviously, every group has now got a pen, but I haven't got one anymore. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, so I'm not going to spend as long on this bit. I just want to spend a few minutes just talking about this so we move forward. I'm going to look at, again, we looked at 2 techniques. There are loads of others for understanding what's going on outside. I'm now going to just briefly look at 2 that you might want to use internally, but we're not going to do those for the exercise, because to do these you'd actually need to talk to the people who work in the cinema or around the cinema or the library or whatever you're doing. So I will talk about them briefly. So I'm going to look at one that we also use quite a lot. It's kind of got a line down the middle of it in my mind. This is going to link a little bit into some of the things that Adrian is going to talk with you about after the break. And this is, as it says there, whatever work we do must be consistent with what's going on in the outside world. We can't ignore the outside world. We can't say, I'm not going to play. Right? I don't believe that you know, the economy is a problem, I'm going to ignore it. Or I don't believe that this election has happened. You have to go with it. But also, most of us have to work within the internal constraints and the internal influences that have already been set. So, probably the 2 middle ones are probably the most interesting ones here. But the first one is mission, which means understanding the overall direction of the organisation we're working for. And that could be very, very high. You know, with the cafe, you may not have it stated like this, but the owner might say, you know, well, actually my reason for doing this is to be the most popular, profitable cafe in the area. Right? So that's a very high level direction they want to go, from which you might break it down into a series of objectives, like I expect to get this number of people coming through, I expect this sort of profit, I expect, you know, the following, you know, average sales over a period and things like that. And that will lead, and the reason I've sort of put the line down there is that will lead to the different ways of doing it, because it's all very well saying I've got an objective, but there are lots of different ways of achieving it. So the strategy might be, I'll take over another cafe, or a strategy might be I'll do a partnership with somebody else. And partnerships are very interesting strategically. I don't know if you've heard this story. It's a very, very quick one. It goes back to a very, very long time ago in America. Apparently they had a very, very hot summer. And there was a fair going on, and a fun fair, and there was a guy selling ice cream, and there was people selling hot dogs, and people selling all sorts of things. The guy was selling waffles, various things, and it was very hot. And the guy who sold ice cream, who was obviously competing with everybody else for people's money, it was during a fairly bad recession, but it was very, very hot, so lots of people wanted to buy ice creams. And the guy who was selling the ice creams had plenty of ice cream, but he ran out of ice cream tubs, so he couldn't sell them. And everybody was really hot and wanted to buy ice cream, but he had no more tubs. And the person at the next stand was selling waffles. So the guy at the waffle place took the waffle and folded it into a cone, and the guy put ice cream in. And he obviously sold all the waffles and all the ice creams, and that was the invention of the ice cream cone, right? Which was the competitor became a collaborator. Right? They were against each other until suddenly they realised working together was a better solution. Right? And I think that's where we have to be very careful here, because it might be that we are too worried about the competitors without thinking of maybe their strengths in different areas. Okay, so that's that, and the strategy then was to work with somebody else. Right? And that might, in a sense, he outsourced the tubs, didn't he? That's what he did. He said, I'm good at ice cream, but I'm not very good at the other bit. Right? And actually people didn't eat the tub. They had to throw that away, so it was a litter problem. And suddenly, great solution. Nobody throws anything away, no rubbish, etc. Okay. And then, so tactically, that would then be at a lower level. How would we do things to help meet the strategy? Okay, that's quite useful. But the second one in here is what we call a resource audit. And that is really something that a lot of organisations, I think, personally think do quite badly. They set, it's really an assessment. Really what it's saying is, I've got this direction I want to go, I've got these things going on outside, so that's what I'm going to do, without thinking, have we got the capability to do it? So they set a strategy, and they can't achieve it because they don't have the resources. Right? I'm not going to do that as an exercise, but I think you can imagine as you start to think of solutions for the problems in your little exercise, you might find that the organisation doesn't have the resources to do it. So let me show you the 5 resources. The first one is physical resources. So for my cafe, we've got a building, we've got some tables, we've got some chairs, we've got a coffee machine. I think those are quite good physical resources. If we don't use them, we're not going to make any money. Other resources we might have might be money. We might be able to solve our problem by investing in new equipment or investing in new things, but if we haven't got any money, that's not a very good solution to our problem. Right? We might have to find other ways of doing it. Another resource is people. Right? And so that might be that we have staff, right, that work for us. We may not. So those are what we often call tangible. I don't know if you're comfortable with the word, but tangible resources, because we can see them, we can hit them, and we can feel them. Right? But 2 resources that are very powerful are things like know-how. So we may have somebody working in the coffee bar, but they may be a qualified barista or whatever. Yeah, they might be a qualified coffee maker. Right? So nobody else can employ them because they're working for us. Right? So it's not just a human resource, it is a know-how resource. They've got experience, and they may even have contacts, right? And relationships and things like that. So that might make a difference. And the other one is reputation. So Apple is a really good example of this. They come up with a new idea, and I don't know about here, but I'm pretty sure it's the same. They don't even market it, they just say, we've got a new one. And everybody goes and buys it. On the off chance it will be good. Right? And it usually is good because of their reputation, isn't it? Right? Now, for instance, if you take Microsoft, maybe that's an extreme example. When Microsoft come out with a new operating system, we don't see queues of people that often saying, I want to use it. Right? I might be wrong, but you don't often do that. So there's a bit of brand and reputation. And if you take the cafe example, if the cafe's got a good reputation and it brings new things onto the menu, people will try it out. If the last time they tried something it was awful, then they're not going to do it again. Right? So when we come up with some ideas towards the end of today, you need to make sure that those ideas deal with some of these external pressures. You need to make sure they're reasonably consistent. I don't think you can do this bit, because you can't know what the strategy is of the circus or whatever, but you can certainly think about, are they likely to have the resources to make it sensible? Right? If one of the resources was it was a very small cafe and wasn't making much profit, then you can't really solve it by getting more people. Right? You can only probably solve it by putting the price up. Is that okay? Right? So, what happens now, I don't know if it happened with one group. When you were doing your PESTLE and your 5 forces, you probably used certain words. You probably didn't use exactly these words, but did anyone find themselves using the word problem? Did anyone find themselves using the word, when you were doing these two? Opportunity? Maybe? Threat? Threat you would have used. So quite often people, when they're doing this, they identify opportunities and threats. If I'm looking at things like our resources, if we've got lots of resources, lots of money, what do you think that might be? And if we've got no people with any skill?
Weakness.
Weakness. Okay, and that's the last of these little acronym things. Strengths, weaknesses, opportunities and threats. So that's what a SWOT analysis is. And the O and the T, it's very difficult to, if I'd have said to you an hour ago, pretend you're working in a taxi company, what are the opportunities and threats? It would have been very difficult to come up with a list. But because I asked you to go through these, I think you could very easily come up with a list. And almost everything in that list is either an opportunity or a threat. Depends on how we react, doesn't it? We can either turn it to our advantage or we cannot. Right? So we might find that a new university has opened in the area, and therefore it is excellent opportunity because lots of students will come and drink coffee. We might see it as a threat because they'll just buy the one and sit there for the rest of their lives. Right? So, while using the free internet that we provided, how about that? And then we wonder why our sales are going down. Right? So that might be where it goes with the cafe. So we think, well, we need to do something. So what you can imagine somebody might say, oh, profit's going down, so we'll put the prices up a little bit. Students still come in, they still buy 1 cup of coffee. It's just because it costs a bit more now, they stay longer. So we haven't actually solved the problem because we got the wrong problem. Right? So if you're okay with that, that's the resource audit, and that leads us to this idea of a much more rich set of strengths that the organisations have, weaknesses, opportunities and threats. And just to finish this little section off, as individuals, remember we talked about the organisation, as individuals we are kind of self-contained. You know, there's an internal part to us and there's the rest of the world, right? And we all have to respond to opportunities and threats, don't we? Things that are going on in our world, some political, some legal, some social, right? All of us. And the way we respond is actually down to stuff that's inside us, which is our own strengths and our own weaknesses. Right? So some people are very good at dealing with change and some are not. Some are very good at working under pressure, some are not. Some people will react in a very positive way to difficulty, and some may not. So it does work for people as well as for organisations. So, we've now got that. So, hopefully, in my last little bit here, we should be able to just move into the last part of this before I hand over. We've got quite a lot that we thought about. We haven't done the circus and the cinema and things for this bit, but we've certainly got that. But what we probably have is the beginnings of identifying some problems. And I'm just going to show you 2 slides on this. It's quite quick. That's an actual problem. You can see it. The guy is what we call tied up in red tape. Right? And an example in the cafe might be, we can see that people are walking past and not coming in because we're full. Right? We can see that it's taking too long to serve people and they're getting upset. We can see that we're getting lots of complaints about the coffee being cold. Is that all of that okay as a kind of a problem you can see? But there are others. This guy doesn't quite know he's got a problem yet, does he? But he doesn't feel good. And he's going to feel even worse in a minute, isn't he? So this is something where people don't bring in an analyst to say, I've got a problem, can you help me solve it? They're problems where people go, you know, I'm sure we could do this better because it doesn't feel right. And the third one, which comes back to this quite a lot, is actually nothing to do with existing problems, but there are things going on out there that if we used them, we could do things better. We could exploit those opportunities. They might not even know that there is a technology available. They might not even know that there is any legislation or anything like that. So my own view on this is very simple, that you can't really do these properly unless you've done these other two properly. Right? So if you're spending all your time dealing with day-to-day problems with the running of the business, you're never going to step back and look for big opportunities. As most organisations are spending all their time dealing with day-to-day problems, it's a tremendous opportunity for the business analysis community, isn't it? To come in and say, while you're doing that, we can help you with this bit. Okay? So, that's those. The last of these sorts of pictures, very complicated one this, but actually very easy when we go through it. If you go into the cafe, and you know, the cafe owner decides to bring in a business analyst to do some analysis and some improvement and solve some problems, the very first thing that will go through the analyst's mind when they walk in there is, and I'm sure you've all done this, what a mess. Right? But actually, it's probably working quite well. I think the worst thing you can do is say, oh, don't do it like that, do it like this, because all you'll do is create a new mess. Right? So I think the place to start is with a mess. Right? And accept that it is a mess. Then you can start finding out details about where the mess is. Right? What are the real bits of data that are around? Well, you know, so why have you brought me in? Well, actually, the sales figures are going down a little bit. Right? Or I've been working every day till midnight, 7 days a week, and every time I get to the end of the year and I do my accounts, we've made a loss. And I don't feel as though we should be because I'm working really hard. Right? So that's when you can start drilling in. And then, this is the link bit, I think, to the last little bit for me, is we'll list some problems. And the important thing there is they're not problems just because somebody says they are problems because they're not dealing with this, usually. We might come up with some problems in a second, we will come up with a problem in a second. Then when we've got problems, then we can start finding ideas. Now, this is a very important sequence. If you start finding ideas before you know what the problem is, it's not much use. And if you start thinking it's a problem before you've got any facts to prove it, it's also pretty bad. Right? So once you've had some ideas, then you'll look some alternative solutions, which you can then validate against what we talked about now. So before I do the last slide of this, the last couple of slides, let's assume that the guy's got a problem. And we've even found out what the problem is, and we might come up with two solutions. One solution is very expensive and doesn't deal with any of that stuff. The other solution is very cheap and deals with all of it. Which one are you going to do? Okay? And I think that's the only way to evaluate a solution, is not only what problems does it solve, but can we do it, because we've got the resources, does it deal with some of the things that are going on now that I'm worried about? Does it actually also have something to do with five forces? Because if the solution we put forward relies on buyers buying from us, and those buyers have got a lot of choice, they may still choose not to come to us. Right? So you've really got to look at all these things, and that's what we'll do in the second half of today. Now, when you go into an organisation like the cinema or the cafe, there are lots of ways of documenting what you did. Anybody? Oh, did you sort of data finding? And I'd probably find lots of problems. The bad news is whoever I talk to would give me different problems. Right? Really classic example of that. I talked to the manager and I don't know what he's talking about sort of moment. He says, we're not making any money because we're not very busy. Lots of people are sitting there drinking coffee but we still don't seem to be making any money. And if I talk to the staff, they say, well, that's not really a problem, actually, it's quite good. Right? When I said we don't actually have to do very much here, right? Because there's not very many customers, so we just spend the day ourselves browsing on the internet. So they haven't got a problem, right? But actually over circus, what did you all think? Well, there is a problem. And I don't know about you, everybody has their own way of understanding these things, and I suppose it's When I showed you the clip art for the cafe, you saw a picture. Did you think a tent or did you think the circle? But before that, you all knew what I was talking about in a cafe, didn't you? I say the word cafe, you imagine something. Did you all imagine a particular cafe that you actually already know? Because I enjoy drawing, but there's it's in town. I don't know. Either way, right? You had a mental image of what you were thinking about. Right? And so one way of documenting it is this thing called a richness. It's just really a picture. I'm not going to go through this, other than to say this is just a sketch that I might make that shows the cooking staff saying we can't work miracles. Right? So in other words, we can't cartoon and then poor old wait serve you good food because we haven't got any money to buy the ingredients. Right? We've got the students here saying this is a great place to work, to sit for hours because nobody chases us and we get the free internet. These are the ones who get told off. We've got these people saying great food but slow service because we haven't got to. Everybody shouts out, aren't they? Right? But it's not their fault. Right? We're working as hard as we can and the tables are dirty. And then we've got this place saying there's nowhere to sit, but we've got these people sitting there for hours. Can you see the interconnection? But the food's not ready, and then the boss is saying, but actually we're not making any money anyway. So we've probably pretty much upset everybody. Right? So that's one way of documenting it. I'm going to say, what are your problems? We might talk to them. Another way which you might have seen is a mind map. Right? And I don't really do too many things today, but they're all good techniques. Everyone has their own personal preferences. I must admit, my manager is saying, what are your problems? My preference is that one. Right? That one, same sort of thing. We've begun to break it down into things to do with process, things, and try and look at each one to do with customers, things to do with staff. And in the staff, we've got the cooking staff are too busy, the waiting staff are rushing around, the counter staff, etc. And up there, you can see the customers are fed up with waiting. They don't like the dirty tables separately. Not deal with it separately, but they're staying too long. Okay, so it's just a way of documenting it. But again, both of these are probably trying to show too much. So what we ought to do is look at it separately. And the technique may be identify a series of separate problems from different perspectives. So we might talk to the customer. I'm going to get you to do the last one. I picked something we call the 6 Ps. It's something called a fishbone diagram. Now, it's obviously called a fishbone diagram because it looks like a fishbone, right? Its real name, right, but you can do it with anything, is an Ishikawa diagram named after the person who invented it, right? But it's pretty simple, and this is one I want you to do. It's simple to look at, right? There's a whole bunch of different ones. It's hard to draw. So what you do is you take each problem in turn, and in this case, I've taken the problem of sales being reduced. So the manager is unhappy, but this one says, right, the sales have gone down. We would have done another fishbone diagram for a problem about the time to serve people, if those were problems. What you do is just draw a simple the headings of people, place, line, and say, look, these problems are happening. This problem is happening for a reason. And on the bones of the fish, there's lots of different ways of doing it. But what I've done here is to put right. To put it right. Process, physical stuff, products and performance measures. I'm going to drill inside those, and I don't expect you to do all of them. You might want to pick maybe one to do. This problem will start to go away. Right? In a minute. I'm looking for the things that are happening in there. So under the product bit, we've got the tables aren't available, a slow service, customers not too long. Under so you do one of these for each of the major problems. Physical evidence. Tables are not clean, but there's positives in here as well. Great food displays. So you can have a look at that. And what you do is you say, right, tell me about what's going on in here. Tell me about what's going on. When we do this last little bit of exercise on in here, tell me about what's going on in here. And then what you do, I'm not sure I've actually got it on this one, I might have. Yes, I have, good. Here's a really good example. Slow service, that's when you get back into your groups. Slow service, right? Now, if you see the same thing in more than one of the bones of the fish, that's a pretty important problem to solve. Well, it's not solving the problem, it's a pretty important break. Adrian's going to take that with you. I think what I want you to do is for your circus, taxi, company, library or whatever, just think of one problem that they might have, just one, that you probably could pick up. Your problems, and we're going to take them a little from the conversations you've had already. Put it down on your flip chart. I think probably draw the 6 Ps, but then pick one or maybe split your group and one person do it further. Okay? So that's the last one, and one do another. And try and come up with the sorts of things that might be leading to that problem. And then we'll hand that over to Adrian to try and see what we can do about those problems. Right? If you're having any trouble finding problems, then I'm pretty sure we can come around and give you help with that. You'll probably find that, from what you've done so far, you've probably realised there's plenty of problems in the taxi company, and there's probably plenty of problems in the library. But try to do it as much as you can from the work you did earlier. Right? So we're going to do that now until coffee, pretty much. And then when we come back after the... Mention the sex, let's talk about this, don't you?
Так, ну что, мы рыбку рисуем или да?
By doing it,